Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we have reached the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitle Talkin Liberty. It is self-explanatory, and it's when we reintroduce our guardian of individual liberty, the constitutional lawyer and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim, and thank you for having me.
Okay, so Scott, let's just dive right into the COVID stuff. An at-home test has been developed where you can test yourself at home for the COVID virus, but some states are choosing not to allow it.
Well, they ban it, Tim, because the people in those states cannot be trusted to have the liberty and autonomy to decide for themselves what testing they may wish to undergo without the basically approval of state officials through a licensee, like a doctor, pharmacist, or so forth. So this isn't a new ban against COVID-19 testing. This is just a ban against self-testing generally. And of course, the sclerotic bureaucracy of these states doesn't allow for the swift removal of odious regulations in the face of a pandemic.
Scott, what is it about bureaucrats that's seemingly built into their DNA that they cannot trust individual people to make decisions for themselves?
Well, in this case, Tim, we have to blame the Maryland General Assembly and the governors who who have enacted this kind of bureaucracy into state law. And I think part of it stems from this idea that we need authority to kind of tell us what to do, right? Like they'll tell you what the appropriate test is. But of course, authority takes too long to meet and have stakeholders testify and, give impact plans and so on and so forth. And if you're dying or caring for someone who may be at risk of COVID, you just can't wait the year it's going to take for the Maryland General Assembly to sit again in session and pass a new law.
Okay, Scott, so everybody has a different approach on how to take down China for what they've done in this whole COVID crisis. But the state of Missouri has an unusual approach. They are actually suing China.
Well, Tim, I think it's a bit farcical, unfortunately. What it says to me is that the Democrats have no stranglehold on ridiculous taxpayer and time-wasting maneuvers in the face of this crisis. This is from a Republican Attorney General, Eric Schmidt, the Attorney General for Missouri, sued China and alleges, Tim, in the complaint that the Communist Party of China and the Chinese government unleashed the virus on the world. So pretty fantastic allegation by a Missouri governor who we presume does not have a inside track on sino-immunology and intelligence gathering there. So one wonders where he gathers the facts. And I just want to say to him, lawyer jokes aside, it is important that people don't use the courts to play games. I don't know what game General Schmidt, Attorney General of Missouri, seems to be playing, but sovereign immunity prevents this case from proceeding. You can't sue China in court in Missouri. It's just, I guess, a headline grabber, or for the Missourians who are ignorant of sovereign immunity and may think he's trying to do something on their behalf.
So, Scott, which has a better chance of succeeding, this lawsuit against China by the state of Missouri or the indictments of those Russian corporate executives by Robert Mueller in the special counsel investigation that he knew would never result in any of those people coming to justice?
Tim, here's the funny thing. In that case, that's actually light years ahead of this Missouri Eric Schmidt case. And the reason why is those people can actually legally be liability can attach to them under our current laws. They're not going to have to pay it, of course, because they're never going to come here, like you mentioned. But China cannot be held liable under our own understanding of law and jurisprudence. Right. It's like, did Attorney General Eric Schmidt go to law school? I think that a better case would be for the citizens of Missouri to sue him for all the hours of state employees that were put into drafting this lawsuit. That case has a better chance of running than the one against China. Tim, more often than not, I think we find ourselves railing against Democrat attorney generals who use the power of their office especially the ones in the Northeast. They seem to be the worst perpetrators. New York, Massachusetts, D.C., of course. But to see, in the midst of the crisis itself, is there nothing better going on in Missouri that the Attorney General could do with his time? Well, Tim, sadly, the cynic in me suspects that this is all generated for Mr. Schmidt's political gain and not an attempt to garner any justice for Missouri.
Okay, Scott, this next story involves your party, the Libertarian Party, which has unfortunately and not surprisingly had a whole lot of trouble getting on the ballot in a particular state.
One thing, though, that Libertarian Party members and officials have had to deal with since time immemorial is attempts by Democrats and Republicans. One thing that those two parties, Tim, almost universally agree with is third parties should be thwarted at every turn and not allowed to compete on the same field for votes that they are allowed to. We don't have a nonpartisan political system in the country. We have a bipartisan political system. And if you're not a member of the Republican or Democrat parties, you have a tough time getting votes. And one of the reasons why is because those party officials often are able to deny ballot access to third parties. Libertarian Party is the largest third party in the country, and they suffer every basically cycle. They have to go out and canvass and get petition drives to get ballot access. And it's basically, it is in fact, Tim, just an attempt to thwart those folks from getting any attention or votes. Well, as you might imagine, you can't stand on a street corner and ask people who are going into the mall or the post office, if they'll sign your petition if there's nobody going in there. So therefore, the Libertarians are saying we can't get ballot access because of this shutdown. And in Illinois, Tim, which is one of the many states that is especially anti-third-party candidates, they had to sue. The Libertarians sued in order to get ballot access, and we do have a judgment. It looks like that they will not have to gather all the signatures that they ordinarily would have. Once again, we have a case where the law doesn't contemplate these sorts of lockdowns and also is not nimble or able to change to meet the new reality. So the state of Illinois wanted to enact some new onerous restriction on libertarian candidates, but the judge said if they had been on the ballot previously as a party, then they can be on the ballot again, which seems like an elegant way to sort of wrap up the challenge and yet still maintain some sort of. You can't have 1,000 choices on the ballot. Presumably, it would just become too much of a mess.
Okay, Scott, we've got time for one more story, and it's an important one. A judge at the National Labor Relations Board has ruled that a tweet by Federalist publisher Ben Domenech was unlawful. What's this about?
Tim, this case shocked me because, I felt like I was beyond surprise at the kind of overreach of federal regulation, but this one takes the cake. Mr. Domenech's tweet was sent a year or so ago when Vox had a labor union walkout, and he just tweeted out to his staff, hey, Federalist people, if any of you tries to start a union, it's back to the salt mines. Just a funny joke referencing the Vox basically kerfuffle, right? Mm-hmm. Well, a Massachusetts lawyer who does not work for the Federalist and has never worked for the Federalist, his name's Joel Fleming. What he does have is likely an encyclopedic understanding of national labor relations law and also a burning hatred for freedom. He filed a complaint, a National Labor Relations Board complaint against the Federalist and Ben's tweet. It was news to me, Tim, that a third party or fourth party having no relation whatsoever to a certain job site could file a labor complaint against that job. You can imagine if you wanted to frustrate somebody else's business to just file labor complaints about that business having no relation to it. Again, the attorney, Mr. Fleming from Massachusetts, Joel Fleming, was not an employee of the Federalist, has no relation with them. He's just a person who has a Twitter account, Tim, and he saw the tweet. What's worse is that Judge Chen of the National Labor Relations Board upheld the complaint as founded and declared the tweet illegal. But I think it's a clear and really unmistakable First Amendment broadside.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose with our own Mark Angelides. All available on demand at LibertyNation.com. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty, and for heaven's sake, stay healthy. We'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.